We were working in Papua, Indonesia, this ice field in the middle of the tropical rainforest. At the base, there are 4 tribes, and they're at war with each other. We were warned about snipers. They come out of the jungle and they shoot. Then they flee into the jungle, and it's almost impossible to find them. It's a wild part of the world. One day we get a call that we are being attacked by the Amungme tribe. 150 people coming up on the ice. They asked me if I would come down and talk to these people. Turns out that in their religion, the arms and legs of their god are the rivers and the valleys, and the head of their god is the glacier. In their words, we were drilling into the skull of their god to steal their memories. And I said, that's exactly what we're doing.
And in order to get these cores, we have to have drills.
I told them that the day would come, and it would be soon, that there would be no memories left. We're trying to preserve the memories. There was a big dispute. The elders said, no, the glaciers have always been here. They will always be here. The young people saying, no, have you seen what's happening to these glaciers? They were trying to come to grasp with the things that they believed in. We had this discussion. They gave me permission to finish. When we got the ice, melting was already underway. The next few years, those ice fields are going to be gone. These glaciers are our canary in a coal mine, our early warning system for the planet, and they're telling us there's serious danger here.
How would I explain Lonnie to someone who's never met him? Imagine you're at a party and you run into this guy. He's pretty ordinary looking. He seems kind of interesting. The next day, you run into a friend of yours. And you say, I was just at a party and I just met this guy and his name is Clark Kent. And your friend looks at you and says, oh my God, don't you know? You just met Superman.
This is our first view of Everest. And here's a discussion on trying to find where we are and where we're headed.
My first encounter with Lonnie, it was like I was meeting a real-life Indiana Jones.
Looking at the hieroglyphics.
Lonnie was breaking new barriers.
We have run out of road. Here's the vehicle. Getting ready to load up the yaks. Head on higher.
Going where no scientist had gone before.
This is the way up.
Changing our entire sense of what is possible.
Leaving base camp, carrying a freezer.
Most people, when they climb a mountain, go up, get to the top, come down, same day. Lonnie and his group, they set up camp, and they stayed there for weeks.
In the process of making kitchen.
We're talking altitudes above 20,000 feet. But they're not simply climbing a mountain for fun. Lonnie has a serious purpose, and that is to collect ice that has this valuable data in it.
It's actual ice that goes back thousands of years in time, and it's telling us about the history of this planet. Each of those ice cores tell a distinct story.
You can see some very large volcanic eruptions.
From a distinct interval of time
This is about 2,000 years before present.
at a distinct location on the planet.
Lonnie Thompson, standing at the top of the Himalayas.
Lonnie's wife, Ellen, is also a glaciologist, and she's quite a force in her own right. Together, they run what's equivalent to a mom-and-pop grocery store, except it's a scientific enterprise.
One of the things you have to understand about Lonnie's work, he started off in the 70s doing this research on these mountain glaciers and realizes that they are starting to melt.
That led him down a path that I don't think he necessarily realized he was going to end up going down. The records he was recovering had these profound implications for what is arguably the greatest challenge we face as a civilization: human-caused climate change.
Morning. We were over on main campus up until 1989. I moved in here, and things have accumulated. These things are disappearing, like libraries, but I have a collection of maps from earlier work on various ice caps around the world. We actually used some of these old maps to look at where the ice was. This is actually a view of Kilimanjaro. You can see where the glaciers are today, but you can also see where the glaciers came down this mountain in the past. Through time, there has been a lot of ice on this mountain, and very little currently, and soon there will be no ice on the mountain. Glaciers serve both as the recorders and the responders to climate change.
August 18th, 2000, Quelccaya ice cap. Where this lake is, used to be a smooth edge. It's no longer there. These boulders on top of this ridge were being pushed by the ice in 1977. And you can get an idea of how much the ice cap has retreated here.
When we first started to monitor Quelccaya, we were not looking for any signs of climate change. We were looking at how does a tropical glacier behave relative to the polar glaciers, because it's never been studied.
Last year we took a similar film and the ice stood right here. Now it's about 15 meters retreated from that point.
With time and going back and visually watching what's happening to this ice field, I was astounded about how rapidly ice can respond to change. When you talk about the speed of a glacier, you were talking about something really slow. But that's not true anymore. This is Kilimanjaro. This is in 1999. Here's the same place in 2017. Two of the glaciers are now gone. So things we know with certainty, glaciers are disappearing. The loss of the glaciers will affect 2 to 3 billion people who depend on water release from glaciers during the dry seasons and during periods of drought.
My dad spends every day looking at climate change. If we put ourselves in his situation, you see this problem. It is unbelievably glaring. And then you're looking out and wondering, why the disbelief? What do you not see? He wants to help all of us understand what is happening to this planet.
This is the highest award given in glaciology, study of glaciers. This is the National Medal of Science, which I received from George W. Bush. In some ways, I look at this and, okay, you've had a very successful career. But I look at the temperature record, and no, I haven't been successful. If I had been successful, we would have changed the trend that we're on.
What I wish people knew about him is the journey that he's taken to bring the message of climate change to the entire world, because what that's taken has been absolutely incredible.
I've always been fascinated with thunder, lightning. My mom always said it was because I was born during a thunderstorm.
He loved to see it come up a storm, the thunder and the lightning, and I would go out on the porch. I'd say, get back in here, lightning will strike you. And I'd have to run him in the house. Every once in a while, he'd stick his head out and give me that great big smile, I'd say, get back in there. He was so fascinated with all the stuff going on out there.
My first interest in science was from a 6th grade teacher, Mr. Underwood. He would give us tasks to go out and measure temperatures and dew points. And I got really good at predicting the weather.
We had a little barn, and he had a weather station set up in the attic of that barn. And he checked the weather every day. He could tell you exactly what the weather was going to be like. And the neighbors got so they would call, Lonnie, is it going to rain today?
So I knew that I wanted to be a scientist. But there's always an issue of where your interest lies and the realities of the world.
Coal is one of the primary natural resources of America. We've fought, we've won 2 world wars powered by coal, and yet it's common knowledge that coal is in the midst of a serious slump, employing fewer and fewer men. Former West Virginia Governor Cecil Underwood, in his final State of the State message, told the legislature that coal is still king. But the fact remains, many mines are closed completely, that many of today's unemployed coal miners will never work again, and what happens to them and their families and their future is one of the most pressing problems of government.
In West Virginia, there weren't too many options. You went to a university or you went to the coal mine. In Gasaway, people didn't go to college. That just didn't happen. This is where I grew up. My mom and dad, their official education was 8th grade. Wasn't that they weren't smart, it just they never had an opportunity.
At an early age, my dad's dad passed away, leaving my grandmother there with 3 kids. It was very hard. And there were times that they were absolutely hungry. Even though she didn't know how she was going to feed the family, my grandmother was always telling my dad, when you grow up, you're gonna travel the world and you're gonna do all these big things. She wanted her children to be educated, and she wanted them to have choices. She wanted them to have the choices that she didn't have.
Most of the kids didn't understand my fascination with school. Even some of the teachers said, you don't want to dream too big because you probably aren't going to make it. My mom, on the other hand, told me, you don't let other people limit what you can do. You have to push yourself. Find out where your limits are.
People put him down. You're nobody from West Virginia. You're gonna be in a coal mine. Come back to reality. It was a very powerful motivator.
To make money for school, I worked 4 part-time jobs. Between getting scholarships and working, I was able to go to college. I learned that if you want to succeed at anything, you can't let discouragement stop you from obtaining your goal. You gotta push yourself to learn for yourself. What are the limits? What are the real limits? I went to Ohio State to study coal geology. In the first quarter, I got this research position in the Institute of Polar Studies. And I truly could not see how you could ever make a living looking at glaciers.
Lonnie thought, oh, that's about glaciers. Who would want to study glaciers? He took the job because he needed to. And he was just swept into a world of total excitement.
In the 70s, there was so much action in Antarctica and Greenland. The National Science Foundation was funding project after project for people to go and just do all kinds of research. It was pretty much an unknown territory, just ripe for adventure and exploration.
Prior to that time, we didn't really have a good temperature record of the world. And then all of a sudden, there was a big effort to look at ice as a recorder of climate.
The deep drilling began 2 years ago, and this summer is our last chance to reach the bedrock.
Willie Dansgaard is really the key figure in the early days. He figured out that if you measure the oxygen isotopes in the ice, it gives you a temperature. And so when you are drilling through a glacier, You can date the layers and watch the temperature change through time. And the deeper you go, the farther back in time you go. Coming out of the ice was all kinds of information. This window into the distant past. For Lonnie, it was just terribly exciting because it was so new.
When those very first cores were being drilled, you could really feel the excitement. Every time you take a new piece of ice, it raises all kind of new questions. To see a record that comes from 60 or 70,000 years ago, to actually look at it and hold it in your hands, it's just absolutely amazing.
He just became totally enamored with ice.
When Lonnie was at Ohio State, he wanted more than anything to work in Greenland. And so he applied for a job there. And he thought he might actually get it. He was turned down. It was really Dansgaard who had somebody else in mind for the job and hired that somebody else. Lonnie was really devastated. He thought, what do we do now?
It was clear that in the polar regions, people had their turf, and I wasn't going to be part of that particular team. I said, okay, find somewhere else to drill. At Ohio State, there was a fella, John Mercer. He had produced these two atlases, glaciers in the northern hemisphere, glaciers in the southern hemisphere. And so he had these boxes of aerial photos. If you go through those boxes, you can see where all the ice is in the world. That is when we found this ice cap, Quelccaya ice cap in Peru. The largest tropical ice cap in the world. The summit of the ice field is 18,000 feet. It has never been studied.
Tropical ice was just never looked at before. This was a huge departure from usual. At the time, the idea that most scientists had was, it is too high. It is just too technically difficult.
If you think about it, it's dangerous. Lonnie would have to take tons of equipment up those mountains. You've got to take drills up there. They've got to take food, not for a night or overnight, but food for weeks on end. That's a really hard thing to do.
Lonnie thought, maybe I can do something with this. He had no idea that he was going to spend the next 10 years of his life wrestling with the ice cap.
When we first made the proposal, the idea just wasn't accepted. At the time, there were a lot of very powerful scientists who were focused on the poles. And that's the only place they wanted scientists to be focused. So when you start to say, I want to look in between, I want to look at what we could pull out of a mountain range, the initial response is, you're never going to get a meaningful history out of these very difficult to access parts of the world.
People didn't believe in what he was proposing. He was told that his ideas were basically silly and that you couldn't do it.
At the time, I was very disappointed in that response. But in February, I got a telex from the program manager in Washington. He told me that he had funded all of his real science projects and he had $7,000 left. What could we do on a tropical glacier for $7,000? And I telex back, I think we could get there. The first trip was exploratory to see if we could find Quelccaya. We didn't know where it was located. We knew it was in an area that hadn't been mapped. So you needed someone at least could give you into eyesight. We found this mountain climber who had seen the ice cap in the distance. Being young, it was the sense of adventure, moving into the unknown. I remember coming to Santa Barbara, the last city. There used to be a police station there and a gate on the road. They would say, that's where the robbers and the murderers go. Everything was unknown from here to the ice cap and back. It was a wild, wild west. I had no idea what I was getting into. I had never climbed a mountain. I had no idea what it would take. I just knew that it was important.
Saturday, 23rd, June, first day on our way to the ice cap. Our first view of the promised land. We're on a pass, 5,000 meters, 40 kilometers from the ice cap.
We camped up there at the end of this road, and then we made the trek over to Quelccaya. And here was this wall. This beautiful wall of layers. This ice cap was layered like a cake. The layers represent the snow that fell in this distant past. It would have been clear to anyone who saw that wall that there was a history here. Then the big question is, how do you get it? This was not a place that your average scientist would go. Too time-consuming, too much effort. To do a major drilling, it takes 6 tons of equipment. And you got to get it up to 18,000 feet. How are you going to do this?
Lonnie was talking about going to higher elevations than any other ice core scientists had gone to before. There was a lot of skepticism that you could do this. It seemed to be impossible.
We wanted to drill to bedrock on Quelccaya and get the entire record. The first thing we had to do was do some proof of concept work. Demonstrate that it was physically possible to do and that Quelccaya contained a climate history.
No one thought it could be done. I felt it's not that it can't be done, it is how can you do it? In those early days, we had really big issues finding the right people who would want to go to an ice cap and live in that type of environment.
Lonnie said, "Hey, mountain, do you want to go?" If you sat down with a beer and thought about it for any length of time, you would not do this. The advantage is if you sit down with 2 beers, then you're going for it.
In those early days, there were no roads into that part of the Andes. One year, we tried coming in from the east. We were over waist deep in snow. It was awful. There was no way you could take a drilling expedition up that side.
At first, I didn't think much about it because I couldn't imagine a mountain being that big. And then he sent back pictures and showed the crevasses they could fall into. I was absolutely worried sick after that. There wasn't no way tying him down to not go, because he went anyway.
It was a lot of work, and it was very physically demanding. This is snow piling up in your lap. You know, you're wet, you're miserable.
The coughing, the lack of air. I distinctly remember throwing up through the ears of a horse. You have to really want that record.
Lonnie went back year after year after year, and he started measuring the glacier.
This is an old oscilloscope. I used to use this for our radar. Send a radio wave down to the bedrock and then measure it when it comes back up. And if you do it enough, you can calculate how thick the ice is. We built that first system for about $40.
Lonnie and I'd be out there in the middle of a storm somewhere. Lonnie would be hauling this big oscilloscope along behind him. Be out there for hours and hours and hours at it. And he was just resilient.
Muchas veces hemos trabajado hasta la 1 o 2 de la mañana. La cosa es terminar, no dejar media caña.
You put out the weather stations the year before, and you come back to this beautiful flat surface. And so you had to tunnel down in the snow, look for guy wires for the weather station, and then use those to lead you to where the stations actually were.
Lonnie genuinely devoted himself to this. And you don't just devote yourself to something because you think it's convenient. You do it because you really like it.
Our daughter said, "Why do you go to Peru so much, Dad?" And I just laughed and said, "Oh, he's just visiting his other family," because he went so often.
When he'd come home, he would work till 1 or 2 in the morning. And I got really good at waking up at that time because it was about the only time I get to see him. That's a hell of a schedule. That was his life for years. He was on a mission to find his place in this world and to fulfill this drive he felt he had inside him.
I would come home. I was very excited about what I was finding. We got all this pushback. This can't be done. These drills are too heavy. You're wasting your time.
Lonnie hadn't quite absorbed all these prejudices that his elders had. You're young, you don't know all this stuff that you're supposed to know, and new things happen.
It took years, but that preliminary work gave people the confidence that we were going to get something that would be totally new.
In the 70s, this was all fields. And because it was just open, it was a beautiful place to launch field program. You can lay out your equipment, your tents and everything, and get them ready to go up to the end of the road. Quelccaya ice cap. The only way there is horses. And these drills are too heavy for horses. My idea was that we will fly the drill up there, we'll drill our cores, and we will fly them down. And that will be job done.
It was the first time in the world that a man is going to take ice cores at that elevation. Glaciologists thought that it was impossible.
When the helicopter came in, the whole town came over. In that part of the world, people had not seen helicopters. Early in the morning, we did a reconnaissance.
Ice cap coming up. The big ice cap to the right. Is this the Quelccaya ice cap now? Let's see. The campsite, there you see it. Quelccaya, here we come.
We'd be flying along at 19,000 feet, and the helicopter would just fall. There just was not enough air to support it at those elevations. It's hard to keep something that heavy in the air.
Helicopter couldn't reach the ice cap. The pilot was afraid.
The pilot said they cannot do this job. The fact was that you could not take a drill from Antarctica and get it up to that ice field. You go to all the trouble to get a helicopter, make all the contracts, fly the thing for 13 hours. You bring in the fuel by boxcar. You've got your drill. We even had a snowmobile there, and no way to get them there. It was really disheartening. And this is where, I was thinking, maybe everyone's right. There's no way you're going to drill in this remote part of the world.
Quelccaya was not going to give him the ice easily. Lonnie's thinking, how are we going to do this? Lonnie turns to his colleague, Bruce Cosey, and he said to Bruce, "We need a lighter drill." Bruce said, "Maybe a solar-powered drill." And Lonnie said, "Do you really think you can do that?" And Bruce said, "We can if we think we can."
We wrote a proposal to drill this ice field using solar power. And the beauty was the panels were not large. If you could get 40 horses, you could take your power source up there. People said, You failed once, you're going to fail again. Not even the National Science Foundation was convinced that solar power had a future. Willie Dansgaard was one of the reviewers. And he sent me a copy of what he sent to NSF. Essentially just said, Quelccaya ice cap is too high for human beings, and the technology does not exist to drill it.
Willie was so respected. And when Willie Dansgaard tells you that it's not doable, you know you've got a lot of odds against you.
At the time, there was a program manager. In his final assessment, he said, well, Willie might be right, but we won't know unless we try. And so we got funded for this expedition.
There are these epic scientific battles. Your fellow scientists were dead set to tear down everything you've said. They want to confine you to the ash heap of history. It's not a kind thing. If you survive that, that's how science goes forward.
I said, I'm young. If I fail, it'll be a footnote in history. But science can only advance when you do things that other people think can't be done.
Lonnie is a visionary. You saw all this information just captured in these glaciers. What you needed was somebody adventurous enough to get into these remote locations and extract it.
First, we had to get the horses. In that part of the world, people would have 1 or 2 max. But how are you going to get 40 horses? There was a fellow who knew a lot of people. We went to see him. He was totally drunk, passed out over the wall. We had to get coffee and sober him up. Once we had the horses, we had this 2-day journey from the end of the nearest road. There was no way that could have been done without these local people. After they left us at that base camp, all that drilling equipment had to be backpacked to the summit. It weighs 6 tons. We couldn't hire porters, so we carried this stuff.
The grueling nature of that effort was amazing. They're sunburned to the point skin was peeling off. Their hands and fingers were shredded. Lonnie's lip ballooned to like 3 times his size. To do that day after day for weeks. How many other people would have said, oh, this is just too damn hard?
As we drilled deeper, you could just feel the excitement build. Pulling out some of those cores, they were like glass cylinders. The records were so clear. You could see the annual dust layers. We counted them all the way to the bottom. We knew that this record was 1,500 years. You could have written a paper while we were in the field. We only said we were going to drill 1 core to bedrock. Food supplies were getting low. We all had a discussion one evening. They said, oh, let's drill 2. We're there 3 months. We know nothing about what's going on out in the real world. We were all just so focused.
The Quelccaya record looked as if it had been written just for Lonnie. Beautifully laminated in the ice was a continuous climate record that showed enormous amounts of information. Things that you just don't get from Greenland and Antarctica. That expedition showed that everybody had been wrong about tropical ice. It showed that tropical ice had a record, and not only did it have a record, it had a beautiful record.
We sent one set of samples to Willie Dansgaard's lab in Denmark. He analyzed those, and he was so excited. From that day on, he became our greatest supporter of why we had to drill these mountain glaciers. Having struggled for 10 years before actually succeeding in getting that record out of there, I have never had the satisfaction that I had after we successfully drilled 2 cores through Quelccaya when everybody said, this is not going to work. This is from Quelccaya days. All you have to do is pick this thing up to see how heavy it is. You think about toting this around at 20,000 feet, and I carried that thing. Yeah. After we successfully drilled Quelccaya, there was a whole lot of interest because of all the excitement that was coming from those records. From there, we had a very strong launching pad for taking our program global.
Lonnie's work expanded. It started going to different places. Places that before we would never have access to.
The U.S. government came to me and asked me if I would go to China. Here's a huge plateau with reported ice caps. No one was working there. It was all so new and exciting.
Never seen layers quite so distinct. Absolutely amazing.
As he grew, his dream grew. And he would say, well, what's the next step? Then what's the next thing? There was always another idea, always another mountain in the distance, always another ice core. He was making lots of steps, not quite sure where it was going.
What more can you ask for life? You're going out there, you're following your passion, and more importantly, you're doing what you feel you were meant to do. Quelccaya became my summer home. I came back every 2 to 3 years, whether we were funded or not, to monitor this glacier. We've actually been coming back to the exact same spot, using the same camera, taking our photographs for the last 40 years.
With each successive visit, Lonnie took photographs. He created a sequence. in 1991, there was a lake. It was just astounding.
Going to the summit, there was melting taking place at the highest point on the glacier. Water was actually present up there. That is death to a glacier. You take a remote place like this, and it's being impacted dramatically by rising temperatures. We had a real problem to deal with on this planet.
Lonnie didn't come to climate change came to him. He was one of those first scientists witnessing the profound impact that climate change was already beginning to have.
This glacier started disappearing before Lonnie's eyes. But in science, it's not just what you see. Lonnie had the hard data.
Our temperature measurements from Quelccaya and the Glacier ice cap in western China both documented warming taking place. They were speaking in one voice. Things were changing, and they were changing on a large scale.
These ice cores were telling an extremely important story. Warming that we've seen over the past century is without precedent as far back as we could go. And it coincides with the Industrial Revolution in fossil fuel burning.
We looked at all the variables that can influence climate, like output of the sun, volcanoes. We can measure that in ice cores. The only consistent explanation was us, human beings, largely through the greenhouse gases that we're emitting into the atmosphere.
Here's where you want to go, isn't it? When this mine was working, mining back in 1890, the coal miner would come in. He had a little cage, it was about like this, and had a little canary in it. And he would take that canary and put it right close to him, and he would watch that canary. As long as that canary would chirp and sing and go on, everything was great. But if you happen to look over and see the canary laying on his back with his feet up there, well, the little canary didn't have enough oxygen to make it, and so it's time for me to leave too.
The lifestyles that we have today have been built on fossil fuels. Coal, oil, gas. It was an important part in the human development. But in the beginning, no one realized how much fuel the world would consume.
What we know is there have been these huge variations in the Earth's climate over time. As the CO2 rises, the planet warms up. It is the master control knob of the temperature of the planet. That is crystal clear. What's new is you didn't have a civilization on this planet digging up all this carbon and burning it at what is, in geologic terms, an extremely rapid pace. We are the equivalent of a meteor hitting this planet from outer space, shocking it with a huge change.
Around the world, the water in the dry season is coming from glaciers. These places are going to become drier. There's going to be less water. So what are our options as human beings? To me, there are only three. One is reduce greenhouse gases. One's adapting to the change in climate that is happening and will continue to happen. And the third is suffering. If you fail in the first two, that's what's left. These glaciers are our canary in a coal mine, our early warning system for the planet. And they're telling us there's serious danger here.
He published the photograph of the Quelccaya outlet glacier and caught a lot of media attention. Lonnie was invited to come to Congress to talk about climate change. We were conflicted in science. If you push too hard, you're perceived more as an advocate. It casts a large shadow on your science.
When I first testified at the U.S. Senate, I tried to stay on the side of the science, present the data, and not become an advocate. I was very hopeful that people would see what's happening and we would react to that.
It was becoming clearer and clearer what the science is telling us. Climate change was real, and it's caused by the burning of fossil fuels. That message is a threat to the most powerful industry on the face of the planet. It was David versus Goliath. They used the tobacco playbook, hire fake experts.
Fred Singer has received consulting fees from Exxon, Shell, Arco, Unocal, and Sun.
I don't see any evidence for global warming.
Created fake groups.
The World Climate Review is funded by the Western Fuels Association, a consortium of coal utilities.
They literally spent millions of dollars to sow doubt and confusion about what the science has to tell us.
The polar regions should be so warm now that we wouldn't even be talking here. It would be obvious.
Scientists were outmatched.
The last year, we've seen a real turnaround in the press and in such quality newspapers as the New York Times and the Washington Post.
It never played out in the way you would hope it would.
When you put everything into this, you put your life on the line. Your family is at home alone for months without you. And then people don't listen. Some people even saying that's a lie. That's really, really hard. And it hurts. He thinks people don't understand, I need more data. If that's what it's going to take, I'll get more data.
By 1991, the lower elevation glaciers were starting to melt. So the question is, where is there a mountain higher where the ice would still be cold and we could get a record from it? Run was a totally different place than we had drilled before. The call is about 20,000 feet. The South Peak is a little over 22,000 feet. In the 1970s, the town of Ungai was totally wiped out by a big avalanche. You see a mountain like that, what you really see is a challenge.
Watching the light, watching the light through. Watching the light, watching the light, watching the light through. This is the call of Huascaran, July 29th.
On Huascaran, we got everything in place. We're drilling. We're getting fantastic cores. We could even see these annual layers in the ice. It was clear this record was much longer than we had hoped for.
Hasta mañana.
One day, the wind is just howling. Snow's drifting off the peaks. We were not prepared. There were a couple days where no one went out. One night, my tent collapsed, and I could feel it sliding. If you go out to the edge, you can fall. I started yelling, asking for someone to help. Unfortunately, someone came out. In order to keep the tent from sliding, they put an ice axe through the floor. The storm lasted 3 nights. During that storm, 2 Italian climbers were blown off at the peak. Makes you wonder, at what cost knowledge? Is it worth a human life? And certainly. We currently have over 7,000 meters, 4.5 miles of ice in our facility. Some of those cores come from places where the glaciers have disappeared since we drilled them. And they will be the only ice from that part of the world that will ever be collected. Because even if the climate changes and becomes cold again, history will start anew, and the past will be lost. At some time in the future, the data will be there. And that may be the long-term legacy that's left.
February 18th, looking at this glacier in the crater, you can see that it's wasting very rapidly. It's hard to see how it could last more than 10 years into the future. And out here, there's a strange one all by himself. It's like an iceberg without an ocean.
After Huascaran, we started to really get concerned about how rapidly the change was coming. Most glaciers were losing mass. When you realize they're going to disappear, and you speed up the process, try and get as many of those records as you can.
Ice cores are usually recovered one by one. Analysis is done. New things are found. Find another ice core. Doing that, you consume a lot of time. We need to get these ice cores and get them now.
We drilled around the world. Bolivia, the Alps, Kilimanjaro, the Russian Arctic, the Himalayas. In 1997, we actually drilled 3 sites in 1 year.
These ice cores were actively melting. In some cases, it was too late. Even though he mobilized as quickly as he could, they had been compromised by melting. It just brought into crystal clear focus, if he doesn't do it, nobody would, and they'd be gone forever. Lonnie and Ellen were bringing us this mountain of knowledge. We had more data points than I could ever have dreamed were possible. We were just, drowning in data, frankly.
In the 2000s, there was this movement towards climate action. An Inconvenient Truth featured Lonnie and his work.
My friend Lonnie Thompson digs core drills in the ice. Here's Lonnie with a last sliver of one of the once mighty glaciers.
Nobel Prize was awarded to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Things were coming together in a way that suggested that maybe we were turning the corner when it comes to the politics of climate change.
We don't always see eye to eye.
But we do agree our country must take action to address climate change.
What's your position on global warming? It's real. We need to do something about it.
The risks of climate change are real.
That picture was taken in 1993. That picture was taken in February of the year 2000. Use your eyes to see what's happening.
People were working together. They were trying to understand the change that was taking place.
From the earliest days, we have been a nation of innovators, and that's what we're here to celebrate. The intellectual achievements of these men and women are momentous, and now they add to their deep and remarkable resumes the highest award a president can confer in their fields, the National Medals of Science and Technology, and I congratulate you.
Lonnie mentioned to me, I'm going to be receiving the National Medal of Science. He was receiving this medal from George W. Bush.
Lonnie G. Thompson.
That seemed to say that we could accept what the scientific community has to say, that this was a real problem and we could debate the form of the solutions, but we could start with the same set of facts. This was the point at which the climate change denial machine engaged in a full-on assault.
Christopher Monckton is a former British journalist who admits he has no scientific qualifications.
In American speak, do you have a word for global warming? Can someone tell me what it is? Altogether, global warming is?
They were fighting tooth and nail to block action on climate and to prevent policymakers from doing something about the problem.
Do you believe global warming, man-made global warming, is real?
I believe we don't know.
Something's not making a whole lot of sense.
I think it's inexact science.
We don't know what's causing climate change on this planet. Let's aggressively develop our oil, our gas, our coal, our nuclear power.
That was the peak. And in fact, I would argue that we started going backwards.
In just 4 years, the number of Americans who agree global warming is man-made has dropped to about half.
He thought he could change something. Then the reality hit that he didn't really make much of a change. That's very disappointing.
The changes with these lakes have created a new hazard for the people living downstream. March 25th, 2006, ice broke off top of Quelccaya. Instead of hitting a glacier in the valley, it hits this lake. This big flood came down the valley. It drowns the alpaca downstream. If you lose 30 alpaca, you're threatening your livelihood.
En primer lugar, agradecerle a Thompson que nos haya invitado. Vivimos en total reciprocidad con la madre naturaleza y nuestra actividad principal es la crianza de la alpaca, la llama.
Were they impacted by that flood?
Sí, porque yo prácticamente estoy al borde del río de Paco y el glaciar se ha venido, ¿no? Y vino como un ruido grande. De ahí todo blanco, estaba la arena encima del pasto. Estaba lodo, todo lodo estaba.
Quelccaya es muy importante porque brinda el agua. El agua es vida. Entonces, sobre ese aspecto yo diría...
Glaciers are part of the life of Peru. Most of the people get the water from glaciers. We used to have 2,000 square kilometers of glaciers. Now we have close to 50%. Peru is going to have water crisis.
As the climate warms, millions of people are going to be displaced. Where are those people going to go?
People will become environmental refugees, and nobody will want them.
Hemos nacido aquí, vivimos aquí y no nos gustaría tampoco no migrar. Nos duele, nos choca que otras personas están contaminando el medio ambiente y trae muchos problemas.
People don't take climate change seriously because the risk is not personal to them.
Dozens of people in the Vancouver area of Western Canada have died in an unprecedented heat wave.
There has been no rain in years. The world's first famine driven entirely by climate change.
There's going to be a range of impacts.
Climate change is threatening the world's coffee supply.
Some are going to come sooner, some are come later.
Look at this video coming out of Texas. That is where people are just fighting to stay alive.
Some will be more devastating than others.
The Northern California town of Paradise is essentially gone.
Is that going to affect you? Really? It will eventually.
Nearly 5 million people have been displaced from their homes in the past 5 years because of natural disasters triggered by the climate crisis.
Are you going to be willing to entirely change your lifestyle? Is Congress going to be willing to change regulations? It's a real challenge.
Does Quelccaya have to die and then we'll do something about global warming? I don't know. Before that happens, other things are going to go wrong. The worry I have is that we finally decide to do something, and it just becomes so much more difficult because we're kind of not in control anymore.
In 2009, I was on an expedition. There was something wrong. My feet swelled up to 2.5 times bigger than normal. They took me to the ER. It turned out that the heart was 20% bigger than it should be. Cardiologists were trying to figure out how I was even conscious. My doctor told me that I'd been diagnosed with congestive heart failure. He said, you have one option and one option only, and that is to have a heart transplant. My first reaction was, you're crazy. You're telling me that the heart that has taken me to the top of all of these mountain ranges in the world is suddenly going to have to be replaced. And I'm saying, no, I don't think so. I decided I'm going to run my expeditions and just keep going.
He was in denial. He really thought he could manage it. We played tremendous mind games with ourselves in not facing reality. He didn't want to face the reality.
Well, we've completed our first core to bedrock, getting that ship down, and working on the second. Later today, I'm headed down. I'm gonna get an asthma shot so I can breathe, and hopefully we'll wrap this up in the next few days.
He continued to push through with his trips. I remember walking through the airport, watching him struggle to breathe, thinking to myself, I don't want you to go on this trip. I'm really afraid you're not going to come home, and you're not going to survive this. He felt, I don't have time to be sick. What I really need to do is go get this ice core, another validation, and the message will become clear. It was just an absolute fear that he would be knocked off the trajectory that he was on.
He thought that if he did bury himself in the work, that maybe it would rectify itself. Doctors have been wrong. He was hoping that they were wrong. One day, he became very, very ill. He ended up in the emergency room. He got on the transplant list, and in 3 days, he was on death's door.
in intensive care. You know, you're kind of conscious and unconscious. I remember one of the nurses, she said, they should have let him go. I could see why you could think that. This stuff that had to be there in order for you to be alive. Alan would sleep in the hospital room. My daughter would come at 2 in the morning, hold my hand. So it was tough. When you're told something's wrong with you, first thing you want to do is deny it. With time and evidence, you come to a point where that's not possible. We all have limits. They are there, and they are real.
He was in the heart hospital at least 2.5 to 3 months. He struggled. Then finally they let him out. He was on a heart pump. That was keeping him alive. If the power is lost, he would have just seconds to change out the batteries, or he would die. He slept at night, powered by the wall. At the time, 88% of the electricity was from coal.
Lonnie and Ellen?
So this is just a brief overview of ice core paleoclimatology.
I heard that Lonnie was ill. He was waiting for a heart transplant. As a reporter, I called him up and said, "Can I come talk to you?" The thought in the back of my head was I may be preparing to write an obituary here.
I remember seeing him during those years. He was withering visibly. I was looking at somebody who was like a shell of their former self. Just kind of thought, I hope that he survives another couple years. It looked that bad.
I was stable. And I could have lived for years with that. Even Ellen and my daughter talked to me about, do you really want to go for a transplant? There's a risk that you're not going to survive. I thought about that. I think in our mind, we do not age. We don't see the years that build up. And I have spent my life around fieldwork. And I'm very passionate about fieldwork. But I also realize there comes a time when this is not going to be possible. I had 63 great years doing what I want to do. I wasn't tethered to some machine. With a transplant, I have a chance that I could have a few more good years. I decided it's not going to be my life going forward.
On May the 1st, his phone rang, and he walks into my office and he's as white as a sheet. He said, "My heart's here. We have to go right now." By 6 o'clock that evening, he was going in for his transplant.
Hello, Regina. This is your dad. Just leave you the message that my heart has come in, and I'm headed over to the hospital, and we plan to go ahead with it. And your mom, call her when you get this message, and she'll keep you informed. Love you. Bye. The lake is too big for the photo. Take another one.
This is a much more difficult task than I originally thought it would be. It's as much emotional as it is fact-driven. When the cardiologist first told me I have to have a heart transplant, I was forced to look at, I may have to change the way I have lived my whole life. That's not an easy thing to do. If you are forced to make a decision that requires a whole change in your lifestyle, you're going to fight it. That's just the way we are. Until you no longer can fight it. I have this discussion with my daughter a lot. And she told me, at any stage in life, we have to look at, okay, what's our strengths? What's our weaknesses? And we have to use what we have for the maximum effect. And she has a real point. Unfortunately, after 40 years of working in this area, we really haven't changed the direction in which we're headed. And in fact, I would argue that we have even gone backwards. So how do you change the trend? That's really ultimately what it's about. My daughter would say that I would be much more effective doing things like we're doing right now in trying to get the message out to a large number of people rather than going for one more ice core record from some part of the remote world. And that's something I've actually put some time in thinking about.
He is one of a small group of scientists whose research actually led to the discovery of global climate change, and she leads a major polar research team at the Ohio State University, where they both work, and they both join me now. Thank you both for coming in.
Thank you.
As time has gone on, we become very concerned about the rate at which the ice is being lost. And then how is that history changing today is critical for millions of people.
Since the heart transplant, he accepts many more talks to the general public. He feels that he has a mission to let the glaciers speak and tell their story.
It gave him a new sense of mission. Lonnie realized that there was another opportunity in life. He has a whole new imperative now.
So that would be my graduation. He became a dentist. He's already retired. We're doing something wrong.
After the experience with the heart, instead of everybody being in a rush, everybody takes a moment to say, I love you. Everybody takes a moment to check in. So he's learned. He knows there's other aspects of life that need attention. And it's really nice to see.
I was wondering the other day, if Lonnie had not existed, would somebody else have done what he has done? The answer to that question might well be no. I think he really is unique in what he's accomplished.
In '74, I got a telex from the program manager that said, we have funded all of our real science projects, and we have $7,000 left. What could you do on that tropical glacier for $7,000? And I telex back, and I said, I think we could get there.
He tells a story now with a little twinkle in his eye. It's a mythic thing. A kid who's born to in a very kind of impoverished background, who determines to make something of himself. He went out and he brought us back this information that we really ought to be using to plot a better path forward.
Science holds the answers. It helps us understand what's possible. It helps us understand what we have to lose. But if we continue to rely on science as our only tool in the toolbox, we will fail. We also need all the folks that are not scientists to not just understand the science, but begin to work together to bring it to life in their communities.
A lot of scientists out there have laid out the roadmap. What I don't think is out there is that belief, believing there's an issue and then believing together it can be overcome. One thing I admire about my dad, he believes it. That is something that he tries to instill in everybody around him.
What is more important than the Earth? There's nowhere else in the universe that life like us can exist. We all have an obligation to take our talents and use them however we can to preserve it for future generations.
There are a lot of people in the world who want to do the right thing. I've seen it everywhere. Whether they're in China, in the US, or South America, their concern is, how do I feed my family? How do I give them a future? That's really ultimately what it's about.
The change won't happen with one person, but it also can't happen without one person. It can't happen without you, it can't happen without me, it can't happen without every country being involved. That's really what it takes. Understanding that you do matter, every person matters.
Having scientists like Lonnie out there changing our entire sense of what is possible sends a signal that maybe it's possible for us to solve this larger problem.
A lot of people fail to recognize what really motivates scientists. The satisfaction from the job is taking what appears to be an impossible task and making it possible. Scientists do this all the time. The number of times we're told in our lifetime that that is impossible. Things are only impossible until they become possible. That's a story of human beings. But you don't know until you try.